Um, how can we love another when we are connected to a society that has never nurtured or taught us to the importance of loving ourselves? I mean, that's an important statement to sort of help you become aware of the possible outcomes of negative outcomes of relationships where people are so committed to meeting society's expectation of having to be in a relationship with somebody, um, instead of seeing the importance of nurturing themselves first, nurturing themselves to um, knowing who you are and being able, and that takes time. That takes time to sort of understand who you are, connecting mind, body, and soul. Um, takes some consistent time of gaining that awareness of who you are and what you stand for and what you'll submit to. Um, yeah, so that's a good one. But be happy with this moment. This moment is your life. Yeah. Defining happiness is, again, something that you desire to consistently want to have, but to understand the true nature of happiness is understanding the total opposite of it. Misery loves company. Never really understood that saying, but because all day I repel or company negative force of being around or influence that project being negative, being ignorant, um, shit, I just lost what I was trying to say, but the right feel for me to wake up. Okay. So the opposite of happy is sadness, and sadness comes from a place of grief. You feel repelled to want to be in that grieving moment, but grief, sadness stem from something lacking or loss. So go back to the polarity of happiness. You've got to know what it's like to feel sad. It's giving me that awareness myself of how I've ever defined what is something sad. I don't think I've ever been as sad about circumstances that I'm currently dealing with that I've hidden, that I choose to keep it under wraps and key about people knowing what makes me feel sad. Not that I'm afraid to let people see that side of me, but it's too detailed to explain. And to be quite honest, I don't have to explain it to people. So yeah, I've always seen growing up, I've always been alone. I've always felt quite alone, very. Never felt I belonged anywhere, and that's a really sad place. So to cover up that, or cover that sadness, I consumed my mind with things that made me happy. Things that were real, things that I felt put a smile on my face. It made me redirect why I do what I do. Like when my kids were growing up and like they would go away, like they'd go and have play dates with their mates and stay the night at their friend's house, and I'll be at home. And my daughter would text me something and she'd be like, "What are you doing, Ma?" I was like, "What are you saying?" And she was like, "Yeah, you're plotting and planning to take over the world." And I was always creating maybe illusions, living in my own little dream world where it's building an empire, building my idea of something that made me feel loved. Where I felt useful and yeah, just thinking about that makes me feel sad actually. Um, that I created an ideal to cover a sadness of feeling I don't belong, because I was in and out of my mother's life. After she left my dad, and it got to a point I feel like she'd look at me. I was a horrible reminder of her failed marriage, of what she was ashamed of, or she was ashamed of acknowledging. And I'm resenting of that shame she felt, and so she would physically abuse me, and to a point that I always thought I would never ever touch my children the way she inflicted punishment, because I saw it as not only shame, but you would only assault or abuse somebody the way you abuse your child, as if they were a rapist, they were the abuser. And like all day, I believe kids need a good hiding every now and then. And yeah, I gave my kids a good wallop every now and then when they would pest me, and they would, they're children, that's what they do. They will constantly try and manipulate a situation to gain what they want out of it, out of things, and to not. I look at that as innocence. That's not something trying to override an adult's control. That for me, I was definitely disciplined by, it was fear driven, so I was afraid to fall out of line because I would get it severely. I was afraid to not be able to comply to what my mum wanted me to do, because if I failed that, like, I was severely punished. And having my parent being raised with this old school mentality and believing that this is normal to tell your child to go to the room and take all your clothes off and be in there waiting naked to have the vacuum cleaner cord, belt buckle, and just be whipped into like bleeding and then dragged into the bathroom and chucked in the shower because you're starting to splatter blood on the bedroom walls. Like, who does that shit? But and I'm not trying, and I, like, as I try and talk about like things that like I was governed by being a child to my parent, it just was what it was, and I'm not blaming anything, but just wanted to share my experience of discipline, how different parenting can and has been like over the top, right? The idea of making your child strip down is to strip you of your mana. Take that to make you feel belittled, to make you feel ridiculed, those horrible feelings to stand there in the mud and just want to belt the shit out of you. This is, again, another defining point of finding fabulous in the failure. As a daughter, I failed my mother, who felt that it was important to punish me accordingly. know is that when there was times when, one of my kids was out of line and my mum saw that, she would say to me, you need to give her a good hiding for that. I actually turn around straight away and say, you know what, shut the fuck up. She's my child. I'll do what I want, don't tell me how I should enforce a punishment on my child because of what she's done. This is pretty raw. This is sharing me because I'm an imperfect human being just like anybody else. I have my flaws and I've had many wars and I've had many wars. But most important, I have to acknowledge that from the way that I was raised and treated, it became sort of like second nature to me. And even maybe the way that I would just speak to my children sometimes too, and I wish I could take that back. But any time that I did punish my children, especially with a hiding or anything like that, I would also make sure that they understood why it got to this extent, why it got to this, and because physical abuse on children or physical abuse is just not necessary, and I definitely hold a lot of that temperament within me, and I will constantly work on trying to soften or find other ways of dealing with it when it affects me emotionally, because my temper or my to that extreme is only risen when some sort of emotion in me is violated. A feeling of that's failing me, which is triggering me, which is making me project this is all I know how to do, to being aware, now understanding that being aware of that emotion that's triggering me, that I feel something's failing me, to be able to think, what's other things that I can put in place to stop myself from escalating to that temperamental, violent outburst. And I was always very, very well of that behaviour in my family, unfortunately. Rough as guts, I even used to beat up on my fucking boy cousins, I was that brutal. But my violence was always an extension of when I've given my love and you shitted on that love, so my love becomes passionate, so you're gonna get a fucking smash. Yeah, and I think when I got to about 17, I was 17, 18, 19, I started professional professional fight, training. I did a lot of training with my ex-husband's older brother, who was black belt. He did capoeira. He was all rounded with different martial arts and technique combat of fighting, and disciplining it helped me to navigate that energy into something more strategically and intellectually, giving myself that opportunity to discern whether or not is this fight even going to be, worth it. Like, I do remember my ex-husband saying to me sometimes, like, if we had a night out the night before, then I would go out the night after with my friends and he'd stay home and look after the kids. And I remember him saying to me a lot of the times that they don't fight, don't have any fights. And he was my husband at the time, and I would try to honour that so much, but it was like I had it written on my forehead. Beat me up, slut, and the butchy fucking Shrek's sisters would try and fucking bash me. I even had fucking Tom and Chip telling me to meet them down at the train station at 3:30 because their boyfriend was hitting on me and it had nothing to do with me. Like, it was always and I would meet them down there and they're like fucking 5 times the size of me. I was like a scrawny little stick when I was a little girl. But my soul obviously was bigger than them. And I'm grateful for that, actually. I'm grateful that I have that, like those unfortunate those situations of how being physically abused, mentally abused, emotionally abused, not only affected me, but installed strengths. And I'm grateful for that, yeah. As weird as it sounds, but so that's my little korero or whakaaro to the topic of finding fabulous in failures. And that's the end of that story.